I'm Duncan McLeod, and this is the TechCentral Show. We're at the JSE in Sandton today for Telkom's annual results for the 12 months ended 31 March 2023. And I'm joined now by Serame Taukobong, who's Group CEO of Telkom. Serame, it's great to see you.
Always good to see you again, Squire.
Now, literally 5 minutes before we sat down to talk here, MTN issued a press statement in which they indicated that they are interested or potentially interested in a deal, saying it'd be good for the stakeholders and shareholders of both organizations. You've had a chance just briefly now to look at MTN's statement. What do you make of it?
Well, I think conversations with MTN, even though we ended where we ended, if you look at the intrinsic design behind what the proposition talks to, it's something that will always make sense for both parties. So I think it's for us to find that landing space and see where we can go. Like I said in my presentation, there are suitors coming around. We do have an I board, and the I board will evaluate each proposition based on its merits to say what can really take Telkom forward.
So when you're presenting the results for Telkom in a year's time, in June 2024, is this going to be a very different business? Is it going to be owned by somebody else?
No, I think it's going to be a different business, but in the way that we are executing ourselves.
Yes.
So, let's be critical and honest. We've talked about value unlock for over 6 years. It has not happened to the level that the market expected.
Why is that?
I think the key thing for me is the intrinsic businesses in Telkom. To get that value to be unlocked, you had to make them standalone. So the OpenServe process, for example, took 3 years for OpenServe to end up being a standalone business. Yeah. So now that job is being done, your conversations are far easier. So if somebody wants to talk to us about an infraco business, it's not muggled in the top co. It's a direct conversation with OpenServe. Equally, for us to then be able to transact the towers, because it's a standalone entity, they're now easier to unleash that value. So for us, it has been really about creating more value and making sure that we deliver on things like free cash flow and top line.
Yes.
And make sure that we attack as a far stronger telecom than a subdivided telecom.
So would your preference then be for Telkom to bring in strategic equity partners for some of its underlying businesses rather than having a wholesale sale of the business to another operator, say to an MTN?
Absolutely. Okay. I think it's all about price. If somebody comes and offers Telkom 100 Rand, I think the shareholders, all of them would say to me, Serame, are you mad? Take that, right? Yeah. But in the market conditions that we're seeing right now, one can create more value by bringing in the strategic partners to make sure, one, you get your cash generation, but also people who will be equally willing to invest with you to grow the business. Yeah. So, somebody comes at 100 Rand.
Sure. What about scale, though? This is a scale game, and many people say the market in mobile in South Africa is only big enough for two operators. Yeah. Cell C has effectively exited that market. They're still around, but they're no longer an infrastructure player. Does it make sense for Telkom to remain in this market as an infrastructure provider in the mobile space specifically?
Well, I think if you look at an infrastructure provider, where the market is going to, particularly with an evolution of 5G, that's going to need lots of capacity from a fiber perspective, which is what we have built in OpenServe. If you talk about market consolidation, we've seen it happen globally, right? And it's who's the right partners at what levels, and also the impact of competition commission, because whatever remedies they might want to come up with might make what looks like a PowerPoint good plan a financially unviable one.
Right. And there's a lot of talk around potential restructuring at Telkom and potential shareholders. Your former CEO is looking to bid. Where does this leave Telkom? Let's assume for a moment that the MTN deal does not happen, that the Axian Sipho Maseko deal does not happen. The Telkom continues as it currently does in the market. Is that sustainable for the next 5 years? What does Telkom 5 years from now look like without a partner, without a strategic equity partner, without an MTN buying it out?
So I think the appetite, certainly at infraco level, is there.
Yes.
Right. People have shown an interest in OpenServe, for example. Right. If one does not sell up to a majority, but that could be a significant cash injection, which will then help balance everything else. You're absolutely right about scale. So in BCX, for example, BCX is in some big corporates, right?
Yes.
What we're looking for is an international partner to bring us that scale. So if you take something like cybersecurity, the South African market is not that mature in an environment. BCX has actually won some contracts in going in to solve an attack and come up with more business. But that's where you're looking for that scale of partner to bring in those skills. If you look at the verticals that are growing in the business, COVID showed us all, healthcare is a big opportunity. There aren't many big players who got that skill set. But if you look to India and China, you've got those people who've got the speciality in an environment. So that's where the scale is going to come in.
I want to ask about BCX and how important it is to Telkom. When you bought the business, I think, when was it? About 10 years ago now?
8?
Maybe not quite that long ago. 2.7 billion all-cash deal at the time. There was a lot of talk in the industry at the time of IT and telecoms convergence. Not so much talk about that these days. Is BCX still, how strategic is BCX to Telkom going forward?
So I think if you look at just the layers that Telkom needs to build on. Right? So it's one thing to have infrastructure. So you've got fiber, you've got data centers, right? But data centers empty are not generating much revenue. So that's a role of the like of a BCX to make sure that your occupancy and your usage, particularly people moving to cloud, is critical in that environment. So in terms of where we're evolving or where the technology is evolving, having the infrastructure is one thing. Having a strong sales arm and also having services on top of that is the next layer. And that's the role that BCX plays for us.
So BCX will stay an asset within.
It'll stay an asset,
Right. And you're talking to potential strategic equity partners. I presume both local and international. Can you maybe give us a bit of flavor as to who you're talking to?
So generally, we've looked at the East. So
China.
India has been preferred, India and China, because markets are similar to us in terms of the customer bases they service.
Sure.
And that's where our natural tendency has been. Unfortunately, brand South Africa has not been helping us much. And you're finding that your European investors are not that interested, whereas your Eastern investors are certainly showing quite high interest.
Okay, interesting. When do you think we might see some sort of news on a BCX ACP?
Well, I think you asked me a question of what will these results look like next year? We certainly hope to close that,
All right, fair enough. Let's talk a bit about government, because they're still your biggest shareholder. They own 45% directly, and of course they also own a stake through the PIC. Now, just to tell me a bit about the relationship between yourself and I know the relationship probably exists mainly between the board and government, but there must have been some conversations around the MTN approach, possibly around the Axian Telecom approach and the restructuring that's happening. What has the message been from the shareholder minister and others in government about where this business is going? What do they want to see?
So what's been actually quite good, Duncan, particularly with the new minister, is a fuller appreciation of what Telecom can do to help government meet their ambitions. So if you take SA Connect, the approach to the minister has been saying, but why don't you facilitate conversations between OpenServe and broadband infrastructure to say how can we better achieve these impacts?
Okay.
Government, why are you building data centers? You own a 55% stake in an entity that's got data centers. And in fact, what you'd want to see more is sovereign data centers, as opposed to sitting in an AWX, for example. So what we're finding with the new minister is a far more positive engagement to say, okay, how can we, as Telecom, owned by government, really help their digital ambitions, which has been very good conversations.
Okay, but what about from the restructuring of Telkom and the introduction of new shareholders and possibly even the entire sale of the business? Have there been conversations with government about that? And if so, what have they been saying?
So I think the key thing with government is realizing the magnitude of the stake that they have in Telecom. And saying that they certainly will not be looking at a significant dilution, but would look at a partner that says strategically build Telkom moving forward. What they're not interested in is a private equity type player who's going to come and strip all the assets.
Okay.
So they've been very clear with that.
Right. Right, interesting. Okay. But if someone came along, like an MTN, and said, we want to buy 100% of Telkom's equity, do you think the government would be open to that discussion?
I think if you look at what the picture of an MTN builds, is to say, let's just take fiber, right? You're now going to have a South African-owned leading fiber core business in the continent. And I think it is that aspiration the government certainly favors. That what are you doing to take this combined entity and make a more significant impact on the continent is what is impressing government.
Okay, and so you think they'll be amenable to discussions about reducing shareholding in that context?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Let's talk a bit about cost cutting inside Telkom. You announced a staff reduction program in February, I think it was, where you would reduce 15% through through retrenchments and voluntary severance packages. You've now completed that process. You've also announced in today's presentation that you're freezing the salary hikes for the next year, and no bonuses will be paid either. Where are you in terms of the staff complement of Telkom relative to your competition? Do you still employ too many people? What is Telkom staff complement going to look like in 3 years' time?
So it's always interesting when comparisons are made that people take the total Telkom staff and then go compare it with MTN. Right. Now, MTN does not have, for instance, a BCX. Right. BCX, which has 5,000 employees.
Or fixed lines.
It doesn't have fixed lines either, which has 4,500 employees. But if you take Telkom Consumer, which is the mobile business, it's sitting at just over 1,200 employees, generating a revenue of 22 billion. So that's the more fair comparison that one needs to go to. That as these businesses also look to go to fiber and stuff like that. So yes, in certain instances, as we move to more NGN, so in BCX, for example, you could find that your managed services propositions were signed on, I sign a contract to give you a service, it's attached on bums and seats. So my 99% SLA is 100 IT engineers. Now everything's on cloud. You don't need 100 engineers. You need 5 working from home. So as we evolve, that's how we start to streamline the size of our business.
So are we likely to see, I mean, under your predecessor, there was wave after wave of retrenchments and voluntary severance programs. Is that going to continue for the foreseeable future?
I think as technology moves, we'll look at those, but equally, we need to then employ newer types of engineers. You know, you need data analysts, for example. So it's going to be a balance of both, but the evolution to technology will determine where we end up.
Okay. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just talking about CapEx and free cash flow, because those are very important areas. Your CapEx spending, I noticed on mobile, was well ahead of the service revenue growth and the subscriber growth in that business. Obviously, a lot of that was to do with load shedding mitigation and installing batteries and diesel costs and all that sort of thing. But what is the longer term prognosis for CapEx in mobile and more broadly?
I think with mobile, obviously the load shedding had an impact on us. It would and where we spent. Mobile, I think at where we're sitting right now, we are in the midst of negotiations of renewing our roaming negotiations with both MTN and Telecom. And with evolution of technology like MORAN and MOCAN, you can look at far more efficient ways of getting your coverage as opposed to building towers. Right? So that's a good opportunity for us to do this. So it'll always be in the 3 to 4 billion spend. Your CapEx spend in OpenServe is really about passing the last mile. Right? The fiber to the home. Those costs have come down from your 15,000 to about 5,000 and continue to go lower. So that will be the big opportunity to go within. I think your fiber to the carrier, that is done, and that funds itself quite easily. In BCX, there has been very low capex expenditure. It's really evolving technology from the old technology to cloud. It's not more than $1 billion in the next 5 years. So I think our capex range is affordable. I think the free cash flow impact in the short term was, of course, the retrenchments. Secondly, the spectrum allocation. And thirdly, then that investment in postpaid, which we got our postpaid base to where we want to do. And the feeling is we will focus strongly on prepaid growth, but still offer our SIM-only postpaid propositions, which are still active. So I see that washing out over the next 18 months to get us to a free cash flow positive situation.
And if load shedding stays at stage 6 or gets worse, how does that impact you?
Well, I think we've built that in now to our business plan. That is our reality.
Right.
And how we continue to look at innovation like your hydrogen type batteries, solar, better lithium batteries, those type of propositions will continue. So it's our reality, and we will deal with.
How is crime impacting you? I know your competitors are up in arms over the situation.
It is significant. So battery theft is quite big.
How big?
Listen, I think we've replaced close to 1,800 batteries in the last 6 months.
Stolen in 6 months.
Yeah.
1,800.
Yeah.
How much do these batteries cost?
So they go from like 150 to 250,000 bucks.
You're kidding?
Yeah. So
that's shocking.
Some of the things it's actually so bad that we've all now invested in putting an epoxy layer on the battery,
yes.
right? But when the guys then come and find that layer, they then damage the entire base station.
Right.
So I have to build from scratch again. So it's just but we're working with the SA police and the army to try and see how can we make sure that protection on these sites is better.
Are you confident you're going to win this war?
We will. We'll have to win this war because I think
we've no choice.
What we're also seeing as well is a lot of our communities are beginning to realize the impact of this. That hey, you steal a battery, we can't make calls. So communities are now actually contributing to making sure that the high theft is not that bad.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's come back to free cash flow. 2.7 billion rand negative free cash flow in the financial year. I'm guessing that was a lot to do with handset financing.
Yeah.
So you were subsidizing a lot of handsets going to contract subscribers, or just it's an upfront cost?
It's accounting treatment. So unfortunately, if in the new IFRS system, if you buy an iPhone,
yes,
at 41,000 bucks, right, that hits our cash flow.
Yes.
But we can only recognize the value over the tenure of the contract. And we've seen more contracts now becoming 36-month contracts.
Sure.
So that big upfront investment is what hits you.
Why did it spike now, though?
Because we intentionally actually went to go after our postpaid base. Our postpaid was 10% of our base, compared to our competitors at 16 to 20%.
Okay.
So it was for us to say, at least with the postpaid, you've got kind of like more annuity income for that. So it was an intentional attack to go and grow our postpaid base a bit. But obviously, the accounting treatment and the impact of the cash flow, and obviously currency as well, because those devices are mostly imported and.
Okay. So Rami, unfortunately, I'm being told we are out of time, but thank you so much for taking the time to talk to TechCentral this morning. It's much appreciated, and hopefully we'll get a chance to catch up in some more detail soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.